Welcome to the Inside Syracuse Basketball Podcast. I'm Mike Waters. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by ESPN's college basketball reporter, Jeff Borzello. Jeff and I talk about Syracuse recruit Benny Williams, class of 2022 commit Kamari Lands, SU's other recruiting targets, and his thoughts on the state of the SU basketball program. We have a really great guest this time around. It's Jeff Borzello of ESPN.com. Esteemed college basketball writer, and also handles a lot of recruiting for ESPN. Jeff, welcome to the podcast, and how you doing?
Well, you said I was esteemed, so I immediately am in a great mood now. So I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I thought this was going to be a lot of fun. We could talk a little bit about recruiting, which folks out there always want, especially Syracuse fans. They all want to know the latest about, kids coming in already committed or guys that Syracuse is still looking at. But we're going to get to talk about some basketball, on the court too, with Syracuse and the program and just kind of where you think the Orange is headed these days. But let's go ahead and let's start with recruiting. Just last weekend, the Iverson Classic was held down in Memphis. Syracuse has an incoming recruit who participated in the game, Benny Williams, 6'8" kid out of the Washington, D.C. area. What can Syracuse fans expect to see from Benny next year as a freshman?
He's really good on the offensive end. I mean, we have him 30th in the ESPN 100 for his class. 6'8" forward, really athletic, good shooter, both mid-range and from the perimeter. I was talking to one of his high school coaches before he got to IMG. I was talking to him the other day, and he said that the two things that he thinks that Benny needs to improve on are strength and consistency. He said he worked on his body a lot at IMG, added about 20 pounds of good weight. And so he's getting stronger. He's getting bigger. He got more confident on the offensive end, more assertive with the ball in his hands. So that should be good for Syracuse fans. But for him, it's all about consistency and bringing it every night. And, Syracuse is going to need him. They're going to need him to play right away. They're going to need him to score right away. And I think that the trajectory he's on over the past 2 or 3 years, I think he's tracking toward a pretty impactful college career next year starting.
Yeah, you're right. I think Syracuse does need him with all the losses at the forward spot between Quincy Guerrier, Alan Griffin, Woody Newton, Robert Braswell. They're all gone. They brought in a couple transfers there. Cole Swider from Jimmy Boeheim from Cornell. But I think if you're a Syracuse fan, you really have to hope that Benny Williams is ready to hit the ground running.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love Cole Swider. I liked him a lot coming out of high school. I thought he was a pro. Just given his size and his shooting ability, I thought he could play at the next level, and I still think he can. He's shown flashes during his first couple of years at Villanova of being someone that can create matchup problems, can make shots from the perimeter. He still has, obviously really good size for his position. He just needs to see the floor more, and he needs to buy in defensively. The zone should help that some, but I think that Swider and Benny Williams, you're two guys coming in that both have size, both can shoot it. So that's an immediate offensive boost. You mentioned they lost some guys up front. I do think that Boeheim should be. I don't know if they're going to replace them, point production to a T, but I do think they're pretty well suited up front on the offensive end.
Well, we'll have to see how that all plays out, and then of course Jimmy Boeheim. Listen, I know he's not highly recruited coming out of high school. He goes to Cornell. He's a fourth-year college player, smart kid. I think he's, the coach at Cornell, Brian Earl, says he's completely changed as a player in 4 years. Who knows? It's going to be really interesting to see how, Coach Boeheim's other son can do this year.
And he's another guy. I mean, obviously his numbers aren't going to translate from the Ivy to the ACC, but he's another guy with size who can make shots from the perimeter. He's not a 40% three-point shooter or anything like that. But you mentioned, I mean, he's changed his game as a freshman at Cornell. I mean, I think he made a handful of threes. And by the time he left, he was making, 1 or 2 a game at a 30-ish% clip. It's not, like I said, not great, but it's just another guy who can add another dimension up front. And, Syracuse, it seemed when they were making their run in March, it was pretty much predicated on making shots from the perimeter. And now they're bringing in, a few more guys at least that can help them in that area.
Before we move on to other recruits, since we've talked about Quincy Guerrier and Robert Braswell, Woody Newton hit the transfer portal. Kadari Richmond leaves Syracuse through the portal and goes to Seton Hall. They're bringing in Swider. They're bringing in Jimmy Boeheim. Syracuse is bringing in Symir Torrance, a local kid who went to Marquette for 2 years. What's been your take on the transfer portal this spring? I know we've got over 1,500 names in there. Are we at a high water mark for the portal because of everything coming together this spring? Or do you think this is the way it's going to be every year now, with kids just deciding to leave schools and just kind of, what is it? Free agency every year in college basketball.
Yeah, I do think that this is going to be kind of the peak of it. It was just kind of a perfect storm of the NCAA giving everyone an extra year, the one-time transfer waiver getting passed. I think that so I do think this is going to be the peak, but I also think that we're going to see the impact of this for the next 3 or 4 years. Like, I don't think the granting an extra year to guys is going to be a 1 year. It's only going to impact next year. And that's because, let's say you're a freshman and you say, all right, well, this senior or this junior is going to leave after next year. I'll get a bigger role. Suddenly he's going to be there another 2 years. And now say maybe that freshman says, I'm going to leave now. And so now if that freshman stays, now if you're a recruit, you're going to go there and you're going to say, well, I don't have the role that I was going to have. I'm going to leave. And so I just think that the extra year of eligibility is really going to, we're going to feel this for 3 or 4 years. And at some point, I think that there's going to be some group that's kind of squeezed out of this. And it might end up being high school recruits, because as we've seen this spring, colleges and coaches are focused really, really heavily on the portal. They're seeing guys in the portal and say, all right, well, I know what Quincy Guerrier is going to do at the college level. I know he can come in. He's already averaged 14 points a game for a Sweet 16 team. Okay, so he can come to Oregon or Arizona State or wherever he ends up going, and he's going to contribute right off the bat, as opposed to Oregon saying, all right, well, I'm going to go after a high school kid. Maybe he's ranked 75th or whoever's available now. We have no idea what he's going to bring to the table. And so I just think that schools, I've spoken to Power 5 coaches in the last few weeks, few months that says, I don't know the last time I talked to a high school kid, or we're not going to take high school commitments until next spring, until we see, how the portal shakes out. And so it's just, the recruiting is going to change pretty dramatically because of the one-time transfer waiver. And you kind of mentioned it is free agency. The one thing I find kind of interesting is that one school told me that they're looking at their roster now in terms of almost like a restricted free agents. If you bring a kid in as a transfer, he can't leave. He's stuck there. He could leave and he could try for a waiver, or he could graduate. But once you get a guy in off transfer, that's kind of that's the best thing you can get now, because there's no really threat of him leaving again. And so I found that pretty interesting. And I don't think they're the only school looking at their roster like that. So I do think that things are going to change. Syracuse, obviously, they did lose a bunch of key guys, and they brought in they weren't the only school to lose key players. And I know Syracuse fans might think they are, and same thing with Georgia fans, but Georgia lost 7 guys, and every school thinks that they're the only school affected, but everyone lost a bunch. There was a stat that I think only 4 schools, Power 5 schools or Power 6 schools, didn't bring in a transfer this spring. It was for Villanova, UConn, Stanford, and Purdue, I believe.
Wow.
So everyone else is relying on transfers. There's no more stigma of building your roster through transfers like there was maybe a decade ago. It's here to stay.
I got one. In my first 15 years of covering Syracuse, Boeheim brought in 3 players that transferred from 4-year schools.
Yeah. Well, so
he's bringing in 3
right.
in 1 year. He had 3 in 15 years.
There was when Quincy transferred, there was somebody on Twitter that said, well, no one leaves Syracuse and has an impact. And I'm like, well, how many kids have left Syracuse that in the last 15 years? There hasn't been a ton. And, moving forward, there's obviously going to be 3 or 4 a year, because you're going to say, we have to reload next year. We have to bring in more guys, and everyone else is doing it. So it's an arms race, and you kind of have to keep up.
Well, let's go back to some high school, good old fashioned high school recruiting. Syracuse does already have a commitment from a kid in the class of 22. They're getting out in front of this class a little early with the commitment of Kamari Lands. Have you seen Kamari, or what can you tell us about him?
Yeah, when I was in my little personal Final Four bubble in Indianapolis for the tournament, I was watching some of the Geico Nationals, and he had one really solid game that I saw. I think he had 10 points, 7 boards, hit a few threes. I liked his length. I liked his athleticism, 6'8" wing. Does most of his work from behind the arc. Not afraid to rise up with a hand in his face and take a shot or take a shot off a screen. Does have some playmaking ability, can play kind of off the bounce, playing in the lane. I do like his offensive game. He chose Syracuse. I think Georgetown was kind of rumored for him for a while. Marquette, Indianapolis native, played at La Lumiere, went out west to prolific prep, but we have him 25th in the ESPN 60 for 2022. But I do like his offensive game. It's another guy that we've talked about it already. You got another guy with size who can make shots. It seems like these 6'7", 6'8" guys that can play on the perimeter is really in Jim Boeheim's wheelhouse right now.
Yeah, they pretty much have like a checklist of things that go down with their forward. 6'8", yep. Long, yep. Athletic, yep. Wingspan, that's a good one.
Yep. Yeah, no, he fits it. I can see him in the zone, long arms, jumping in passing lanes, things like that. And I liked what I saw from him, and I think that his game is still kind of developing. I'm assuming he'll kind of take that next step in terms of playing off the bounce and using his size a little bit more. But 6'8", who can shoot and who could rise up over defenders, that's a pretty good starting spot.
I want to ask you just about a couple other kids that I know Syracuse is looking at in that class. It seems like they're really trying to put together a good group. One kid is Kyle Filipowski. Heard a little bit about this kid already. Seen some video that really made me take notice.
Yeah, he's really creating some buzz this spring. He's already ranked number 31 in our rankings, and I would not be surprised to see him move up those rankings. Jonathan Gavoni, our NBA draft guy, he watched him at a local event here in New York a couple of weeks ago. He came away really impressed. I've watched some synergy clips of him. He's versatile, 6'10", but he can handle the ball really well, really good passer, pretty skilled, but he's not, one of those 6'10", 6'11" guy who's frail with no muscle. I mean, he can finish through contact. He kind of absorbs contact, looks for it. There's been a couple of plays where I was watching where he would get the ball at the top of the key or on the wing, shot fake, attack off the bounce. You don't usually see that from someone 6'10". He's got some physicality and toughness that I didn't know he had. And I was pretty impressed by that. His recruiting is, it's really taking off, and he's kind of moving not quickly in it, but he's got official visits scheduled for Indiana, Ohio State, Syracuse, Iowa, UConn's involved. I think he's supposed to visit there at some point in the next couple of months. I've heard UCLA's involved. One school I think could be a sleeper for him would be Duke. They've recruited his AAU program before. He's the type of kid who I could see Duke jumping in on come late summer or after the July period, or maybe early in the fall if they miss on a couple of guys. But I really like him. I think he's developing, and I think his ceiling's pretty high. But I also think right now he's a very, very good player, and he's a guy that whose stock seems to be continuing to rise.
I know he already has the offer from Syracuse, and he has official visits set up here in June. Another guy who's got an official visit in June up here in Syracuse is a kid by the name of Justin Taylor. Now, again, I haven't seen him in person, but I went to YouTube and I pulled up some clips, and I'm thinking, I've been told he's a 6'6" and he's a really good shooter.
Yeah.
So I think in my head, I think I know what I'm going to see on these clips. There's a lot of 3-pointers. And like the first 3 clips I see are he puts the ball on the floor, goes to the basket, and he's dunking on people. And I'm like, this is not at all what I expected.
It's funny, and this doesn't apply to him, but you mentioned you saw some clips of him. That's the same as college coaches have seen. They haven't seen any of these guys in person either. So a coach referred to some prospects as quarantine recruits, guys that nobody's seen in person. They get these Zoom offers, and then come July or whenever coaches can see them, we'll see who's really still interested. But yeah, like I said, that does not apply to Justin Taylor. But you mentioned it. I mean, he's got the reputation of being this knockdown shooter. Pretty good size, excellent perimeter shooter, skilled. But like you said, you watch him a little bit, just a couple of possessions, and he's putting it on the deck. He's kind of taking guys off the dribble, pull-ups. He's not just a catch-and-shoot guy. Got pretty good size for the wing. He's playing with Team Takeover on the grassroots circuit this spring and summer, which is a program that Syracuse is pretty familiar with over the years. You mentioned Syracuse. He's got the offer. He's supposed to take a visit in June. Virginia, I think he's from Charlottesville, so that'd be the hometown school. They offered in the winter. North Carolina offered in February. He's supposed to take visits to Carolina and Virginia Tech. in June as well. So his recruitment is going to be interesting to see whether, when Carolina kind of jumps in on a kid and the kid sets up a visit pretty quickly, they might have a leg up. But like I said, we'll see how it goes in June and July when coaches can see these players and see if anyone else jumps into the mix.
Mentioning Carolina there gives me we're going to go on a tangent here. We're going to move away from the recruits.
There you go.
Forgive me.
Good segue by me then.
Maybe I don't know. We'll see about the segue. It might just be a tangent. Roy Williams surprises a lot of people and retires at the end of this past season.
On April Fool's Day, no less.
Yeah, I know. I didn't believe it at first because it was April Fool's Day. And, Hubert Davis, former Carolina player, assistant coach under Roy, is the new head coach. Is it going to be the same for Carolina? I mean, like when they jump in on a Justin Taylor, is it the same as if Roy Williams was making that phone call? Because here's the thing. I'm asking this knowing that my follow-up is going to be about Syracuse and another coach who we don't know when he's going to retire.
I mean, I think Carolina itself still has that kind of cachet. It's still that blue blood program. It might be the best program in college basketball. I don't think Hubert, when Roy Williams walks into a gym in July, heads turn, he's there. Same thing with, Coach K and Calipari. Hubert Davis will not have that same impact. I don't think. I mean, I'm assuming he will not have the same sort of immediate, everyone starts whispering, okay, Hubert Davis is here. I don't think that's going to happen. Yeah. Right. I mean, I Roy Williams had that kind of aura about him when he walked into a gym. And we've seen Hubert Davis, he's taken some guys so far that I don't know if Roy Williams would have taken. Justin McCoy transferred from Virginia. To me, he was a bench piece of Virginia. I can't see him being anything more at Carolina. Brady Manick, the transfer from Oklahoma, he's very good, but he's a stretch for the type of player that Carolina has not really used. I mean, right. Roy Williams has kind of always used that two big lineup, Kennedy Meeks and Isaiah Hicks and just big jumbo lineups. And Manick is not like that. He's going to stay on the perimeter. So, aside from the whole, does Carolina still kind of automatically get that jump in a kid's mind when they offer? I'm also curious to see how Hubert Davis, if he changes the style. I mean, that two big style has kind of been in vogue at Carolina for 20 years or so. Yeah. And will Hubert Davis kind of modernize that offense and maybe play with some stretch fours and, multiple ball handlers, things like that. So there are things that are going to change at Carolina. And we won't really know to see the recruiting impact of it until, the early signing period or late signing period.
Okay. So we talk about how Carolina is going to make a transition from a legend to another guy. What do you make of the situation up here at Syracuse? And, Jim Boeheim's 76 years old as we speak. He turned 77 in November, but shows no signs of slowing down or feeling like he wants to hang up the whistle. But where do you kind of see the Syracuse program vis-a-vis Boeheim in retirement?
Yeah, I do think Boeheim's part of the group, that probably includes Coach K and a couple other guys that, college basketball is changing. It's changing pretty dramatically with name, image, likeness and one-time transfer waiver that, guys that have been in the business for 50 years, they're going to either have to adjust or they're going to say, what, I'm not changing for the final 2 years of my career. I'm going to hang it up. I think there's a pretty good group. I was talking to somebody the other day and he said, that's pretty tied into coaches. And he said, I think there's probably 10 or more Power 5, Power 6 coaches that would be on the retirement watch list. Guys wow. that are saying, what, it's, I'm old enough. I've been around for a while and it's time to move on. And the next generation of coaches can kind of deal with name, image, likeness and transfers and things like that. Yeah. So, Boeheim's obviously in that group. And he'd probably be near the top of it in terms of guys who, are likely to retire in sometime in the next 5 years. I mean, I think that's probably might be even be an overestimation. I have no idea if he's thinking about it now, but it's going to be a conversation piece. Every conversation with a recruit, it's going to come up. Every conversation with a transfer, it's going to come up. I mean, it's going to be kind of the elephant in the room, but it has been for 5, 6, 7 years now, and it hasn't really it hasn't really slowed them down too much. Now, I think that Syracuse is different than Carolina and probably Duke in terms of, I don't necessarily think they have to stay in the family when they do replace Jim Boeheim. I think they could. I mean, I think Red Autry could get the job. I think, Jerry McNamara could stay on. I think there are Mike Hopkins is probably the elephant in the room. You might know more about that one than I do in terms of whether he would be welcome back. He hasn't really lit it up at Washington since his first couple of years there.
Right. You'd probably like to see him have a good year or two, but
yes.
I think that don't you have to, if you're John Wildhack, the athletic director here at Syracuse, don't you have to make a phone call to Hopkins just to make him say no before you move on?
Probably do. I mean, I think that just he was so entrenched into what Syracuse did for so long, and he was considered to be. I mean, he was the coach in waiting for so long. I mean, I just think it would be odd if assuming he does kind of not go like 7-24 again. I do think that he would have to be on that list of people you call really early in the process, because I still think he's a good coach and he's a good recruiter and he's familiar with the area, familiar with the program, familiar with the league. There's that kind of adjustment process will not really be there for him. He can kind of step in and keep things moving pretty quickly. And, now how much does continuity matter in a generation like this where rosters are changing so dramatically every year? I don't know. But I do think that Hop would certainly be on that list. Now, if you think about guys outside the family, I mean, guys that come to mind, Ed Cooley, Kevin Willard, you don't seem to be overly enthused about either of those names. But they're guys that have just recruited the Northeast.
Really good coaches. I just don't know if you're Wildhack, if you're John Wildhack again, do you look at Ed Cooley and what he's done at Providence and really say, you know what? It's worth going outside the family and not getting Red Autry or Jerry McNamara.
Right. No, I agree with you.
I just don't know. I don't see it actually.
No, that's fair. And that's, I mean, that's kind of the question that a lot of these schools have had. I mean, like, Arizona just had a job opening and it was, okay, are they going to stay in the family? There's look at all these candidates that they can hire and, Jason Terry and Josh Pastner and all these guys. And then they said, you know what, let's go try it out with Tommy Lloyd, the Gonzaga assistant. And,
right.
And will that work out? I have no idea. I mean, I think it could, but we saw this past cycle. I've seen more big schools stay within the family more than ever before. I mean, Indiana, Mike Woodson, it's a top 10 job in the country. And they went for a guy with no college experience. I mean, Carolina, the best job in the country. They promoted from within. And these are jobs that they could have called any number of coaches. Brad Stevens might not have taken either job, but there's a lot of names after Brad Stevens that you could call and that would have taken the job before. At Arizona, same thing. There's a number of guys they could have called that probably would have taken the job before Tommy Lloyd. And it's going to be interesting to see if that trend continues in terms of, hey, we're going to stay inside the family. We're going to get a guy. And for Indiana, I think it matters more than it does for Syracuse. I think that they hang on to their prime era more than most schools do. But I do think Syracuse will have options both inside and outside the family. And like you said, is Ed Cooley just immediately a better option than Red Autry? Probably not. Now, if Ed Cooley wins 25 games the next 3 years, maybe we have a different conversation. But Cooley and Willard were just two names that popped in my head because they both recruited the area. They're both familiar with, kind of the recruiting landscape. And I could see those two guys, being in the mix, assuming they have success the next couple of years until Boeheim steps down.
Do other coaches negatively recruit against Syracuse by using Boeheim's age?
I don't think so. There's a lot of older coaches in the league. It's not like there's filled with 40-year-olds in the league in the ACC.
Yeah, Jim Larinaga and Leonard Hamilton can't really.
Right, Coach K. I mean, these guys aren't. They're not. I mean, Roy Williams before he retired. These guys aren't really going to come at Jim Boeheim. No, I mean, I don't know. I don't really think that's a huge factor. I mean, I do think the question probably comes up saying, hey, are you going to be here when my son graduates in 4 years? And that's a fair question. I don't know if another school has to bring up his age in order for that question to be asked. I think it's kind of, it's going to come up. And, I did a piece last week on what each school sells and what each school is kind of hindered by, and age never came up for Boeheim. It was the weather and the location, things like that. But, it's still clearly a top 5 job in the league, and it can recruit at a top 5 level in the league. And when you consider that group includes Duke and Carolina, I think Syracuse is still in a pretty good spot when it comes to recruiting. And we mentioned, the targets we mentioned already, pretty much all of them, with the exception of Taylor, I think are ranked in the top 30, top 35 in their classes, and they've hit the transfer portal pretty heavily. So it clearly hasn't really hindered them on the recruiting trail. Now, like I said, will this kind of heat up, and will the retirement talk, heat up or get louder over the next couple of years? Maybe. But, we both agreed. It's been a conversation piece for 6-7 years now. And I don't think they've really taken too big of a hit.
Yeah, it really is interesting. I have Syracuse fans all the time telling me that, how recruiting has taken a downturn here at Syracuse. And I'm like, really? Darius Baisley was McDonald's All-American and would have been here at Syracuse if he wasn't like the only high school player ever to get $1 million internship at a sneaker company. Benny Williams, Kamari Lands, and the other targets they're looking at here. It doesn't seem like recruiting's taking a downturn right now.
No, there was a couple of, and I wouldn't even call them missteps, but it was, who was the point guard maybe 8 years ago who left after his freshman year? Tyler Ennis.
Oh, you're talking about Tyler. Yeah.
Yeah. To me, like, that's kind of the one that pops in my head is I don't think they expected him to be one and done.
No.
And so I think they bring in Caleb Joseph. They bring in Caleb Joseph, say, all right, you're going to learn for a year behind Tyler Ennis. And he doesn't. He's got to be thrown into it right away. He's not ready. He's not an ACC level player immediately. That kind of hurts their point guard. Then, the Quad A Green stuff happens and they don't get him. And so from that perspective, yeah, you could say, oh, they took a hit. But I just think it was kind of just a weird kind of confluence of events at the point guard spot for a few years that, maybe put them behind the 8 ball. But, that's not really,
The era you're talking about is the era of the NCAA investigation and sanctions too.
Yeah. It's just, you can look at it and say, okay, the recruiting's taking a hit. To me, like, you got to dig a little deeper and say, okay, well, it was this, and this, and that led to it. More so than, they're just missing on guys left and right. Every school, Louisville fans think their guys are missing on everyone, and Carolina thinks they're missing on everyone. Everyone thinks that they're missing on all their guys. It's just not really the case. Sometimes the kid backs away. Sometimes the school backs away without saying anything because they're not going to disparage a kid that they don't want anymore. It's just, you could probably find every school in the country besides even Kentucky and Duke those fans will say that they're missing on kids. It's kind of the way it is in this hyper information age where everyone thinks they know every target that a school has. It's just easier to kind of nitpick on their recruiting ability.
Wow. No fan base better than Syracuse fans. God love them. As football coach Dick McPherson used to say, God love them. So listen, Jeff, this has been a fascinating conversation, but I promised to have you out in 15 or 20 minutes, and we're closing in on 30. So I'm really pushing the limits.
I speak. I go on tangents. I apologize.
It's been fun listening to you and picking your brain. I appreciate your time. We're going to let you get back to your 1-year-old and practicing on the little miniature soccer.
Those are definitely my 1-year-old's balls and nets. Those definitely not mine. Definitely not mine. I don't use them at all.
Sure, not yours, whatever. But go get some soccer goals, and I look forward to seeing you in person at a game next year.
Absolutely, I'll be there.
All right, Jeff. Thank you.
Thanks.